Hello everyone, and welcome to the FrameFlow channel. If you are new here, please consider subscribing and hitting that like button. Today, we are going to be discussing the movie Zootopia 2, slated for release in 2025. The neon glow of Zootopia still hums, but the rhythm feels different now. Judy Hopps, having long since cemented her reputation as one of the finest officers the ZPD has ever seen, finds herself increasingly drawn to the strategic side of police work. Her years of determined climbing from farm bunny to celebrated detective have imbued her with a deep understanding of systemic challenges, a perspective that sometimes clashes with the on-the-ground rush of instinct she still relies on. Nick Wilde, meanwhile, has settled comfortably into his role as Judy's unofficial partner and the department's most charming, if occasionally exasperating, intelligence gatherer. His earlier life as a con artist provides him with an uncanny knack for spotting a manufactured narrative, a skill that proves vital when the city faces a new, insidious threat. The tension begins subtly, not with overt violence, but with a creeping professional paralysis affecting key sectors of Zootopia's infrastructure. Reports of essential service providers, from specialized sanitation crews to high-level data analysts, mysteriously withdrawing their services, flood the precinct. Initially dismissed as widespread union disputes or simple burnout following the tumultuous events of the first film, Judy senses a pattern her superiors are too bogged down in paperwork to notice. She remembers the painstaking process of building trust after the Savage Scare, understanding that fear, once sown, can paralyze a community more effectively than any physical barrier. Nick, utilizing his old underworld contacts, discovers that the withdrawals are coordinated, orchestrated by a shadowy organization manipulating supply chains and digital access points. This group isn't interested in money or open conflict. Their goal seems to be the systemic grinding of Zootopia to a halt, exposing the fragility of its integrated ecosystem. The inspiration here seems drawn from classic espionage thrillers, but filtered through the lens of animal-centric bureaucracy. Their investigation leads them deep into the less glamorous, often overlooked administrative districts, places where the true gears of the metropolis turn. Judy, leveraging her meticulous nature honed during her early, often ridiculed investigations, starts tracing the financial breadcrumbs that connect the suddenly unavailable experts. She finds herself constantly having to prove the severity of the threat to skeptical, higher-ranking mammals who view the situation as an administrative hiccup rather than a coordinated attack on civic order. Nick's role becomes crucial when they realize the mastermind is exploiting the very advancements Zootopia prides itself on: advanced automation and cross-species digital integration. He has to quickly adapt his street smarts to understand encryption and network vulnerabilities, a steep learning curve that provides some of the film's lighter moments as he begrudgingly consults with tech-savvy rodents. His character arc here shows the maturation of a hustler into a genuinely loyal operative, willing to learn the complex rules of the game he once sought to exploit. The climax doesn't involve a massive chase scene, but a tense infiltration of a hidden server farm located beneath the city's primary water purification plant. A location chosen for its symbolic power over the city's lifeblood. The antagonist, revealed to be a disillusioned former city planner, a pragmatic, hyper-organized beaver, convinced that Zootopia's diversity makes it inherently unstable and thus needing a forced reset, is attempting to simultaneously lock down all essential services and release deeply embarrassing, privacy-violating data on major public figures. Judy and Nick confront the planner not with brute force, but with a demonstration of the interconnectedness he sought to sever. Judy appeals to the structural integrity of the city she has worked so hard to protect, while Nick uses his persuasive charm, refined over years of successful deception, to sow doubt in the beaver's rigid ideology. They manage to restore core systems just as the digital shutdown reaches critical mass, not by defeating the plan entirely, but by proving that the cooperation he despised is the city's true, resilient foundation. They save Zootopia, not by policing its inhabitants, but by defending its ability to function, reinforcing Judy's belief in the power of diligent, dedicated civil service, and Nick's surprising capacity for upholding the very system he once scorned. The strain on Judy Hopps was palpable. It manifested not in frantic physical action, as it often did during the initial savage scare crisis, but in the slow, agonizing grind of bureaucratic fatigue. Her shoulders, usually square with confidence, carried the weight of official skepticism. She'd stare at the flowcharts detailing service disruptions, tracing the lines with a white-gloved finger, seeking the single, flawed logic gate that connected the seemingly random blackouts. Her internal monologue often drifted back to her early days on the force, those times when a simple, direct appeal to a wrongdoer's conscience seemed like the most powerful tool. Now, the wrongdoer was abstract, hiding behind layers of shell corporations and encrypted protocols. It made her miss the clear-cut morality of a good, old-fashioned foot chase. Nick, ever the counterpoint, thrived in the shadows of this digital malaise. The challenge of decoding unseen sabotage seemed to reawaken the sharper edges of his con artist past. He wasn't just gathering intel. He was performing a narrative reversal, taking the lies spun against the city and weaving them into a counter-truth. There was a genuine excitement in his eyes when he cracked a particularly convoluted access code, a look that suggested he'd just found the perfect flaw in a Mark's facade. He'd often lean against Judy's desk, radiating an almost exasperated fondness, remarking how much more satisfying it was to outsmart a shadowy planner than a simple two-bit hustler. Because now, he admitted with a rare moment of sincerity, he was fighting for something that actually mattered beyond his own survival. Their bond deepened under this pressure. During late nights fueled by lukewarm coffee, they'd revisit old cases, using the memory of past successes, like unraveling the complicated machinations of Bellwether, as templates for understanding this new, cerebral enemy. Judy admired Nick's fluid adaptability. He could pivot from discussing high-level network topology one moment to charming a recalcitrant security guard the next, his natural charisma proving to be as effective a key as any lockpick. Nick, in turn, saw in Judy's relentless pursuit of order the very dedication he now craved to apply constructively, realizing that true mastery wasn't just about avoiding the trap, but about building the secure enclosure. The beaver antagonist, whose name was something dry and technical like Silas Vellum, represented the ultimate bureaucratic nightmare, order taken to a lethal extreme. He wasn't motivated by malice in the traditional sense, but by a pathological belief in efficiency achieved through forced segregation. A twisted echo of the very biases they thought they had overcome. When Judy finally accessed Vellum's manifesto, a dense 70-page document arguing for regional specialization over integrated urbanism, she felt a cold wave of recognition. She saw the same fear of the unknown that plagued the fearful predators in the past, merely expressed through spreadsheets and algorithms instead of primal instincts. The resolution at the water plant wasn't just about flipping switches back on. It was a deeply personal affirmation for both of them. As Vellum ranted about the inherent inefficiency of collaboration, Judy didn't shout. She simply pointed to the emergency response teams, predators and prey working side by side, guided by the protocols Vellum had tried to erase, demonstrating that Zootopia's messy integration was its strength, not its weakness. Nick's final contribution was purely humanizing. He didn't argue the technical points, but reminded Vellum, with a gentle, knowing smile, that every great system, no matter how perfectly designed, eventually needs a little unexpected improvisation to survive the real world. It was a testament to their combined careers. The determined vertical climb of the earnest idealist meeting the smooth horizontal navigation of the reformed cynic, ensuring the city's chaotic heart kept beating. The air in the server farm hung heavy and cold, smelling faintly of ozone and damp concrete, a stark contrast to the sun-drenched organic vibrancy of the world above. For Judy, standing near the central processing core, the silence was deafening. It was the silence of potential catastrophe, far scarier than any loud explosion. She adjusted her earmuffs, the small movements betraying the tension coiling in her stomach. Her bunny physiology, usually an asset for sharp hearing, now seemed to amplify every flicker of the emergency lights. She thought of her parents back in Bunny Burrow, their quiet pride in her achievements now feeling like a fragile thing that could shatter with one wrong digital command. This wasn't just about upholding the law. It was about preserving the very concept of Zootopia as a viable shared space. Nick, moving with a liquid grace that belied the seriousness of the situation, was working his way around the periphery of the room, his focus entirely on disrupting Vellum's final lockdown sequence. He'd shed his usual slightly rumpled appearance, his vest neatly buttoned, mirroring the focused intensity he once reserved only for high-stakes hustles. The irony wasn't lost on him. He, the ultimate opportunist, was now safeguarding the integrity of the system he'd spent his youth trying to bilk. His dialogue with Vellum was a masterclass in controlled engagement. He didn't mock the beaver's rigidity. Instead, he treated the planner's delusion with the respectful, almost sad curiosity of a behavioral scientist studying a rare, failing mechanism. "It's elegant, Silas," Nick murmured, tapping a discarded schematic. "Truly beautiful in its isolation. But honey, beautiful doesn't feed anyone. And it certainly doesn't keep the pipes from freezing in January." When Vellum finally snapped, railing against the necessary compromises of community, Judy stepped forward, her small stature momentarily overshadowed by the sheer force of her conviction. She bypassed the philosophical debate, going straight to the emotional core of the city's success. She detailed the logistics of the city's morning rush hour, the coordinated schedules between the nocturnal and diurnal species, the synchronized delivery routes, the intricate cooperation needed just to get everyone their morning cup of juice or coffee. She spoke not as a cop reciting regulations, but as a citizen cataloging shared miracles. Her voice, usually bright, took on a husky timbre of sheer exhaustion and commitment. This wasn't the fiery rhetoric of her early career. It was the steady, undeniable proof built over years of patient work. The turning point occurred when Nick, seeing Vellum's defenses momentarily waver under Judy's relentless logic, didn't try to hack the system. Instead, he accessed the system's internal diagnostics, the part Vellum had deemed inefficient noise, and broadcasted a live feed of the ZPD command center. The image showed Chief Bogo, usually the picture of unyielding sternness, calmly coordinating support efforts with every departmental head, regardless of species, all focused on mitigating the cascading failures, not placing blame. It was messy, loud, and imperfectly coordinated, but it was undeniably functional. Witnessing this unscripted, necessary chaos, the very thing Vellum sought to eliminate, seemed to break the beaver's rigid focus. The realization that true stability required constant, messy adaptation, rather than perfect, sterile control, finally registered. The immediate threat was neutralized, not by overwhelming force, but by presenting the undeniable, vibrant reality of Zootopia's functional resilience. Judy and Nick walked out into the rising dawn, not as heroes of a blockbuster confrontation, but as deeply satisfied public servants who had just patched a critical vulnerability in the shared municipal spirit. The aftermath was less a celebration and more a profound administrative deep clean. Chief Bogo, maintaining his standard low tolerance for lingering inefficiency, assigned Judy and Nick to lead the interdepartmental task force dedicated to hardening Zootopia's digital and infrastructural weak points. This assignment perfectly married their newfound expertise, Judy's ability to synthesize complex policy into actionable steps, and Nick's almost intuitive understanding of how malicious actors think. Their office space, temporarily relocated to a sterile planning annex, became a hub of intense, collaborative energy. Judy insisted on daily progress reports written in plain language, a direct response to Vellum's suffocating jargon. She treated the remediation process with the same meticulous attention she applied to assembling evidence during a trial, demanding accountability at every level. Nick, surprisingly, embraced the paperwork aspect, treating the drafting of new security protocols as if he were designing an intricate, legal con against future threats. He found a strange satisfaction in creating unbreakable rules, a complete reversal of his former modus operandi. He started using terms like risk mitigation matrix and redundancy layering, often to the amusement of the more traditionally minded mammals in the IT department. yet his insights were consistently sharp. He argued passionately against any proposed solution that relied too heavily on isolating species or sectors, constantly reminding the planners that isolation bred vulnerability, a lesson learned long ago in the dark alleys of Tundra Town. Their collaboration, now a recognized force within the ZPD, also brought them into closer contact with the city's emerging class of specialized thinkers. They consulted often with an elderly, wise-eyed Arctic shrew who specialized in historical city planning. A mentor figure who understood that every city, no matter how advanced, eventually succumbs to the entropy of its own success. This shrew often reminded Judy that the greatest threats were rarely external invaders, but rather the internal philosophical failures of the planners themselves. The emotional undercurrent of this phase was a quiet settling of personal purpose. Judy recognized that her dream had evolved. It wasn't just about proving a bunny could be a cop. It was about ensuring the structure itself was robust enough to support all its inhabitants, regardless of size or past prejudice. Nick, conversely, discovered a deep-seated contentment in maintenance, in being the guardian of the smooth operation rather than the disruptor of it. He often caught Judy staring out the window at the bustling metropolis, a soft, proprietary look on her face. He'd nudge her, a brief, affectionate touch of his paw to her arm, acknowledging the shared weight and the quiet victory. They were no longer just partners chasing villains. They were the city's silent, dedicated maintenance crew, ensuring that the grand, sprawling, often absurd experiment of Zootopia continued to function, one perfectly patched protocol at a time. Their greatest accomplishment, they both understood, was making the city boringly, reliably stable. This new phase of civic defense led to the introduction of an unexpected character who would test their newfound stability. Dr. Vivian Quill, a highly respected ornithologist and vocal advocate for natural resource management, who specialized in aerial surveillance and atmospheric monitoring. Quill wasn't malicious like Vellum. Her concern stemmed from an acute ecological perspective. She began lobbying vehemently against the very infrastructure improvements Judy and Nick were implementing, arguing that the increased energy demands and heat signatures generated by Zootopia's fortified digital backbone were disrupting migratory patterns of several key insect and bird populations essential for Zootopia's outer agricultural belts. Judy, pragmatic as ever, respected Quill's data, which was rigorously sourced and peer-reviewed. The conflict wasn't ideological. It was a direct clash between urban security and ecological sustainability. Judy found herself mediating between the hard demands of data security and the fluid, living requirements of the environment, a challenge far more nuanced than chasing a thief. She spent hours in planning meetings, her ears drooping slightly with the effort of reconciling two equally valid claims on the city's resources. She even started taking short, quiet flights in a police drone just to observe the migratory corridors herself, trying to internalize the aerial perspective that Quill possessed so naturally. Nick, meanwhile, approached Dr. Quill with a mixture of professional respect and his signature underlying skepticism regarding authority figures, even benevolent ones. He suspected Quill's passion bordered on zealotry, and he deployed his intelligence-gathering skills not to expose her, but to understand the true scope of the ecological impact. He found that Quill, in her isolated pursuit of avian perfection, was starting to recommend radical, impractical solutions, such as mandated citywide energy rationing during peak migration periods, a move that would certainly trigger the exact kind of systemic collapse Vellum had dreamed of. Their dynamic shifted into a careful, mutual tutoring session. Nick taught Quill how to frame her ecological concerns in terms relevant to municipal governance and economic stability, translating bird pathways into critical infrastructure interruption risks. He used his charm, honed from years of convincing skeptical clients, to make the bureaucratic system want to listen to her. Judy, in turn, learned to appreciate the subtle language of nature's patterns, realizing that a healthy city was not just one that was secure against internal sabotage, but one that was in harmony with the world surrounding it. She saw this as the ultimate test of Zootopia's integration ideal. Can the city sustain itself without harming the delicate balance that enabled its food supply? The climax of this arc involved a tense standoff near the city's central solar array. Quill, in a desperate, non-violent protest, had deployed a large, reflective banner designed to temporarily blind the solar sensors, forcing a temporary grid reduction. Judy arrived first, heart pounding, expecting confrontation. Instead of drawing her weapon, Judy sat down on the grass nearby, offering Quill a thermos of herbal tea, a concession Nick had insisted upon, knowing Quill respected organic remedies. They didn't argue the morality of the protest. They argued the physics of the solution. Nick arrived moments later, not with backup, but with a drone schematic showing a proposed alternative light reflector shield system Quill hadn't considered. It was a compromise forged in mutual understanding. Quill got her environmental concerns officially prioritized in the next fiscal review, and Zootopia kept its power grid intact. The resolution was quiet, thoughtful, and underscored a crucial lesson. The hardest threats to manage are not the outright enemies, but the fiercely dedicated allies whose priorities, however noble, create unintended friction within the complex machine they are all trying to protect. The tea ceremony under the harsh midday sun felt like a quiet truce in a much larger, ongoing war for Zootopia's soul. Judy realized then that her growth as a detective wasn't measured by the size of the villains she apprehended, but by the complexity of the problems she could now navigate without resorting to handcuffs. She was learning to police ideology and competing needs, which was infinitely harder than policing behavior. Her carrot pen, usually poised to write a citation, rested idle, a symbol of her current role as mediator rather than enforcer. Nick, ever the opportunist for comfort and connection, made sure Dr. Quill felt genuinely heard. He noticed that Quill, despite her intellectual rigor, seemed profoundly isolated, perhaps mirroring the loneliness inherent in seeing a perspective no one else quite grasped. He leaned into his expertise in building rapport with difficult individuals, offering Quill insights into how to utilize the ZPD's considerable data-gathering power to track ecological trends in real time, making her observations actionable rather than purely theoretical objections. He framed it as enhancing her influence. Why just protest the system, Doc, when you can become its most indispensable, albeit slightly prickly feature? This flattery, laced with genuine respect for her science, worked where bureaucratic negotiation failed. The success with Quill solidified Judy and Nick's reputation as the city's premier system resilience unit. They were no longer just solving crimes, they were optimizing the city's operating system. This brought them into the sphere of Mayor Lionheart's office, where the political winds were always shifting. Lionheart, eager to showcase Zootopia's recovery, wanted grand, visible successes. He pressured Judy and Nick to produce an easily digestible narrative for the public, a clear victory against a singular threat. Judy bristled at the demand for simplification. She remembered vividly the danger of the savage scare when ambiguity bred panic. She resisted turning Quill into a public scapegoat, insisting that the city needed transparency about its inherent trade-offs. Her refusal to sanitize the report was bold, marking a point where her confidence now eclipsed her need for external validation from authority figures. She stood her ground with a quiet ferocity that surprised even Nick, who offered silent, encouraging nods from the side of the room, clearly enjoying watching his partner expertly manage high-level political pressure. Nick, observing Judy's steadfastness, felt a deep, warming pride. His earlier life taught him that true power was controlling the narrative, but now he saw that Judy wielded a different, more sustainable power, the truth, delivered with unwavering integrity. He handled the political fallout, using his charm and well-placed rumors to divert media attention away from the messy internal debates about energy consumption, ensuring the focus remained on the successful joint technological solutions implemented with Quill. He spun the story not as a near catastrophe, but as a proactive, multidisciplinary leap forward in holistic urban security. Their work concluded, not with a press conference, but with a quiet agreement to co-author a white paper on adaptive governance, a document that blended Judy's dedication to structure and Nick's understanding of systemic flexibility. They returned to their usual shared desk, the glow of the neon outside casting familiar shadows. They understood that Zootopia's true narrative wasn't a series of episodic battles, but the slow, continuous process of two unlikely individuals, learning how to govern a living, breathing, flawed metropolis together. The greatest adventure wasn't finding the next villain, but mastering the art of being indispensable citizens. The white paper, once a daunting bureaucratic project, transformed under their dual authorship into an unexpected philosophical text. Judy's chapters were rigorously structured, utilizing precise terminology learned from BOGO and the Planning Annex, detailing empirical evidence for adaptive policy implementation. Nick's contributions, however, were the binding agent. He peppered the dense technical language with anecdotes, a cautionary tale about a con artist who underestimated the power of routine, a reflection on how the most complex traps always relied on a simple, overlooked assumption. He insisted on including a chapter titled The Virtue of Necessary Inefficiency, arguing that perfect order was the precursor to predictable failure. Their success, ironically, brought them a new kind of stagnation. The piece was almost unnerving. Judy found herself missing the visceral clarity of a chase, the immediate gratification of apprehending a perpetrator. She started shadowing patrol units more frequently, observing rookie officers grappling with pedestrian violations, feeling a slight, unsettling pull back toward the simple enforcement of black and white rules. It was the occupational hazard of the successful problem solver. Once the biggest threat is neutralized, the everyday becomes frustratingly mundane. She confided in Nick one evening, staring at a stack of untouched compliance reports. "It feels like we built a fortress, Nick, and now we just polish the railings. Is this it?" Nick, lounging in his chair with an air of complete relaxation that usually preceded a new scheme, simply smiled. He knew this restlessness intimately. It was the itch of the reformed rogue. It's not polishing, fluffball. It's fortifying the foundation against the next idiot who thinks they can outsmart the whole city. Besides, he winked, we're playing the long game now. The biggest cons are the ones that take years to set up. He suggested they take a sabbatical, not a vacation, but a deliberate immersion into the city's periphery. He wanted to explore the unintegrated zones, the pockets where Zootopia's grand vision hadn't quite reached, using their official clearance to gain access to areas usually sealed off. Their journey took them far beyond the polished districts, into the hastily constructed transit hubs bordering the wildlands, places teeming with temporary workers and transient populations who lived outside the official security matrices Judy and Nick had so diligently constructed. Here, the problems weren't digital sabotage or ecological friction. They were rooted in poverty, exploitation, and the deep-seated prejudices that bureaucracy often papered over. They encountered families, mixed species groups, living in precarious, unregulated housing, utterly dependent on the stability Judy had fought for, yet feeling entirely disconnected from its benefits. The emotional toll was heavy. Judy saw the raw failure of the system she believed in, not its security, but its reach. She witnessed small-scale bullying and unfair evictions, situations where Vellum's fear of instability was a daily reality for the disenfranchised, enforced by petty local landlords rather than citywide algorithms. Nick, surprisingly, found his old instincts reactivating, not for personal gain, but for advocacy. He used his knowledge of legal loopholes and bureaucratic obfuscation to help these communities file legitimate grievances, becoming their unofficial, highly effective pro bono legal aid. He wasn't conning the system, he was exploiting its blind spots for good, a level of moral complexity he hadn't known existed until now. This exploration reaffirmed that Zootopia's greatest vulnerability wasn't a flaw in code, but a failure of empathy in implementation, a lesson that promised to redefine their careers once more. The air in these liminal spaces was thick with the smell of unregulated industry and desperation, a raw odor that cut through the sanitized atmosphere Judy and Nick were accustomed to. These peripheral zones felt less like part of the grand Zootopia experiment, and more like footnotes the city preferred to ignore. Judy, stripped of her usual ZPD uniform and clad in plain field gear, felt an unfamiliar exposure. Her methodical approach seemed inadequate here. Evidence wasn't waiting to be cataloged. It was actively being suppressed by apathy and neglect. She watched a young Fox family, clearly struggling, being intimidated by a debt collector who operated with impunity outside the jurisdiction of the main precinct's focus. The incident sparked a familiar, righteous fury in Judy, but this time tempered by Nick's patient analysis. Nick, in his element amidst the shadows and ignored paperwork, wasn't hustling for cash. He was hustling for justice through procedural warfare. He didn't see loan sharks, he saw exploitable loopholes in the outdated municipal zoning codes that these unofficial settlements were built upon. He spent hours cross-referencing obscure health and safety mandates with tenancy laws, his brow furrowed in concentration, a look Judy had never seen directed at anything less than a flawless poker hand. He explained his strategy to Judy with casual brilliance. "We don't fight the thug fluff. We fight the document that gives him permission to exist here." This realization humbled Judy. She saw that the threats requiring the most effort weren't the bomb-toting villains, but the slow, grinding mechanisms of systemic neglect that allowed predatory behavior to flourish in the cracks. Their presence in the periphery started causing ripples. Local figures, the unofficial mayors of these transitional neighborhoods, began seeking them out, cautiously at first, then with overwhelming need. Judy's reputation as a principled officer gave them the credibility they needed to be taken seriously, while Nick's uncanny ability to speak the language of loopholes gave the residents actual recourse. During a tense meeting in a makeshift community hall, an elderly sheep elder spoke directly to Judy, her voice trembling, about the fear that their homes could be bulldozed overnight on a technicality. Judy didn't offer platitudes. She offered a concrete, immediate plan to file for historical landmark status for their settlement. A defense strategy drawn directly from Nick's arcane research. The emotional payoff for Nick was profound. He had always operated outside the law because the law felt exclusionary and biased. Now, using the very tools of the establishment he respected and distrusted in equal measure, he was creating tangible safety nets for those truly marginalized. He looked at Judy, seeing the profound satisfaction reflected in her own eyes. They weren't just enforcing the city's rules. They were making sure the city's rules applied fairly to everyone. When they finally returned to their quiet precinct desk, the polished chrome of Zootopia felt less like a victory achieved, and more like a promise that still needed rigorous, continuous fulfillment. Their partnership had evolved from a professional necessity to a shared, deep-seated commitment to social architecture, protecting the structure not just from external attack, but from internal, silent corrosion. They understood now that the real work of Zootopia was never done. It was an endless cycle of building, testing, and empathetic repair. The return to the central precinct brought with it a noticeable shift in how Judy and Nick were perceived, and more importantly, how they perceived their own mission. They were no longer the exciting anomaly of the Savage Scare aftermath. They were the necessary ballast against systemic decay. Chief Bogo, ever the pragmatist, recognized the value of their unique fieldwork, formally designating their status not as detectives, but as internal stability consultants, a title that perfectly captured their new mandate to diagnose and treat the city's philosophical ailments as much as its criminal ones. This new designation meant more high-level briefings, often involving dry data streams that detailed resource allocation in underserved zones. Judy excelled here, her inherent fairness driving her to master the complex economic models. She saw the data not as abstract numbers, but as proxy indicators for living situations. A low housing grant didn't represent a budget deficit. It represented a damp, cold winter for a family of otters. Her determination to translate statistics into empathy became her greatest administrative asset, making her reports impossible for cynical budget hawks to ignore. Nick, however, struggled with the formality. He found himself chafing under the requirement to document every insight with footnotes and verifiable sources. During one particularly tedious session reviewing infrastructure expenditure in the lower residential tunnels, he nearly derailed the meeting by suggesting they stop wasting time on regulatory reports and instead stage a public, nonviolent sit-in at the offices of the negligent construction firm. Judy smoothly intercepted, channeling Nick's righteous anger into a precise, legally devastating threat of litigation based on obscure environmental protection statutes he had unearthed the week before. She managed the tone. He provided the weaponized knowledge. Their most significant challenge arrived in the form of a citywide audit initiated by the mayor's office, ostensibly to review the success of anti-prejudice initiatives, but clearly intended as a political maneuver to highlight successes while downplaying lingering inequities. The audit team, composed of highly credentialed, entirely desk-bound assessors, descended on the precinct like a plague of meticulous vultures. They viewed Judy and Nick's peripheral work with deep suspicion, seeing it as mission creep. Officers wasting time on social work instead of visible crime. The leader of the audit team was a sleek, highly organized capybara named Alistair, whose entire professional philosophy seemed to revolve around metrics proving compliance, not actual change. Alistair challenged Judy directly on the value of their time spent in the unregulated zones, demanding quantifiable evidence that their interventions had translated into a measurable decrease in minor infractions within the central districts. For Judy, this felt like being asked to prove that kindness was measurable, an insult to the messy reality she'd just witnessed. Nick saw the political trap instantly. He recognized Alistair's type, someone who needed a narrative packaged perfectly for consumption. Rather than fighting Alistair's metrics, Nick played into them, but on his own terms. He worked with Judy to create a presentation that blended the raw, impactful imagery from the periphery, the Fox family safe, the sheep elders petition filed, with highly technical cross-references to city ordinances that should have protected those residents all along. He argued that the failure wasn't due to a lack of law, but a failure of distribution of awareness of those laws. He demonstrated, using Alistair's own bureaucratic language, that neglecting the fringes was statistically increasing long-term costs in emergency services and public health. A classic Nick maneuver, making the ethical argument sound like sound fiscal policy. The final scene sees Judy and Nick presenting their findings. When Alistair tried to dismiss their report as overly anecdotal, Nick projected a simple image, a side-by-side comparison. On one side, a meticulously clean, perfectly compliant street corner in the financial district. On the other, the vibrant, messy, but legally sound community center they helped establish in the tunnels. "You can measure the shine, Alistair," Nick concluded softly, leaning on the podium, his usual grin absent, replaced by earnest seriousness. "But we're measuring the resilience. Zootopia isn't strong because it's perfect. It's strong because we know exactly where the cracks are, and we're the ones who know how to fill them without hiding the fact that they existed." Judy nodded, a silent affirmation that their journey had transformed them from law enforcers into the city's necessary conscience, perpetually patrolling the boundary between policy and humanity. The capybara auditor, Alistair, initially dismissed their combined presentation with a stiff nod that conveyed disdain more than acknowledgement. He saw the vibrant humanism of their peripheral work as contamination of the clean data he was tasked to collect. However, Nick's final summation, framing ethical intervention as essential risk aversion, struck a nerve rooted in Alistair's own deep-seated fear of unchecked disorder. The audit results, when finally released, were a diplomatic masterpiece. Vague enough to satisfy the mayor's political needs, yet detailed enough to quietly mandate increased funding and official oversight for Judy and Nick's stabilization unit. They had successfully weaponized bureaucracy against itself. This victory, however, brought a new kind of exhaustion. The constant need to justify their existence to an establishment that preferred neat, contained problems. Judy found herself spending more time drafting justification memos than actually interacting with the community. She missed the immediacy of the field. The weight of being the department's conscience was heavy, often leading to tense, private moments with Nick where the only escape was dissecting the absurdity of the political landscape. Nick, reading her mood, suggested they take a working trip to the edges of the neighboring, less integrated territories, areas Zootopia usually only interacted with for resource exchange. He framed it as proactive intelligence gathering, arguing that true stability required understanding external pressures. This trip wasn't about policing. It was about understanding Zootopia's geopolitical boundaries. They traveled in a discreet, unmarked vehicle, shedding the ZPD veneer slightly. Judy found the landscape outside Zootopia unsettlingly quiet, a contrast to the city's constant engineered hum. It was on this trip they encountered the true extent of the ecological disruption Dr. Quill had warned about. Not just shifting migratory paths, but localized food chain collapse in the river systems bordering Zootopia's industrial runoff zones, a consequence of the increased energy demands Judy had approved during the hardening phase. The data hadn't lied. The trade-off was real, and it was impacting vulnerable, non-voting populations just outside the city limits. Judy felt a profound wave of personal accountability. She hadn't just balanced internal systems. Her actions had caused external harm. This realization sobered her completely, stripping away the triumphant feeling from their previous victories. Nick, witnessing Judy's distress, acted not as the witty partner, but as the steadfast foundation. He used his finely tuned social radar to approach the affected small communities, a collection of resilient, independent muskrat and beaver clans who viewed Zootopia with deep suspicion. He didn't promise ZPD intervention. He offered expertise in negotiation and resource sharing, leveraging his understanding of contracts and supply chains. He saw their plight as a problem of unequal leverage, a situation he understood intimately from his con artist days. The climax of this exploration wasn't a confrontation, but a tense all-night negotiation session held in a dilapidated riverside warehouse. Judy, utilizing her detailed understanding of Zootopia's internal resource allocation tables, was able to pinpoint precisely where the city could divert clean water and energy capacity without crashing its core systems, a delicate balancing act that required almost perfect, real-time modeling. Nick, meanwhile, used his persuasive skills to convince the skeptical clan leaders that accepting Zootopia's assistance was not a surrender of autonomy, but a strategic alliance against environmental disaster. He convinced them that if they pooled their ancestral knowledge of sustainable river management with Zootopia's technological might, they could create a self-sustaining buffer zone, a true integration beyond the city walls. As the sun rose over the river, a tentative agreement was struck, marked not by a signed warrant, but by a shared, exhausted handshake between Judy, Nick, and the lead muskrat elder. They returned to Zootopia not with new arrests, but with a mandate to fundamentally restructure the city's relationship with its environment. Their careers had now expanded beyond internal stability. They were becoming the ambassadors of Zootopia's ethical footprint. Judy realized that the true measure of her success was not the absence of conflict, but the successful management of unavoidable, complex compromise. A lesson learned not in the precinct, but on the muddy banks of consequence. The long-awaited return to Zootopia in the 2025 installment dives deeper into the societal undercurrents only hinted at in the original. This sequel wisely sidesteps a simple rehash of the predator-prey dynamic, instead focusing on the intricate, evolving bureaucracy of a metropolis built on idealistic integration. Judy Hopps, now a seasoned, albeit slightly disillusioned officer within the ZPD's Major Crimes Unit, carries the weight of her early triumphs. Her career trajectory, once meteoric, has plateaued somewhat. The novelty of the carrot-chomping country cop has faded, replaced by the grinding reality of precinct politics and paperwork that even Nick Wilde, with his inherent slipperiness, sometimes struggles to navigate. Nick, meanwhile, has leveraged his criminal past into a surprisingly effective, if ethically gray, career as a private consultant, often unofficially feeding Judy vital, street-level intelligence. His journey is less about redemption and more about calculated adaptation. He understands the system's weak points because he helped exploit them, a nuance that makes his partnership with Judy compellingly tense. Their mutual respect remains, but the easy, intuitive flow of their first investigation is complicated by professional boundaries they both struggle to maintain, especially as Judy nears a critical promotion review. The central narrative revolves around a sophisticated economic sabotage plot, targeting the city's increasingly vital sustainable energy grid, a system largely reliant on technology pioneered by an elusive collective of nocturnal engineers. This shift in focus, from biological tension to infrastructural vulnerability, reflects the city's maturation. Zootopia is no longer just struggling with who belongs. It is struggling with how to maintain its complex, interconnected modernity. The antagonists are not primal urges, but rather deeply entrenched financial interests who see the city's progressive facade as an obstacle to unchecked profit, effectively weaponizing algorithms and supply chain manipulation against the established order. One of the most striking developments is the expanded role of the city planning department, revealing the physical segregation that underlies Zootopia's supposed unity. New districts, designed with subtle but undeniable biases regarding light exposure and travel time for diurnal versus nocturnal residents, become crucial settings. The film brilliantly utilizes environmental storytelling here. We see evidence of infrastructural neglect in Tundra Town and Rainforest District, long before any explicit dialogue addresses it, highlighting how systemic inequality operates through omission rather than overt hostility. The sequel explores the burden of representation, particularly on Judy. She is constantly battling the perception that her presence in major crimes is an affirmative action hire rather than merit-based. Her inspiration, Chief Bogo, watches her with a weary paternalism, recognizing her talent, but fearing she lacks the political cunning necessary to survive the next level of command. Bogo's own career, spent navigating the transition from a more segregated past to the current fragile peace, serves as a silent cautionary tale for Judy. Nick's inspiration, conversely, comes from the forgotten edges of the city, the hustlers and small-time operators who understand true scarcity. His narrative arc this time focuses on the temptation to revert to his most self-serving instincts when the system seems rigged against justice. His unique skill set, honed by years of small cons, proves unexpectedly useful in deciphering the opaque financial documents that baffle the ZPD's forensic accounting division. The thematic core deepens beyond simple tolerance. It addresses the exhausting nature of maintaining utopia, where constant vigilance against entropy, both social and structural, is required. The resolution does not involve a dramatic chase scene ending with a perp being tasered. Instead, it necessitates a complex legislative and corporate maneuver that forces transparency. The film posits that true integration requires not just shared space, but shared accountability, a lesson hard-won by our two heroes who must finally align their professional and personal trust completely to expose the rot within the shining metropolis. The final moments suggest that the next battle for Zootopia won't be fought with badges, but with policy and public opinion. The emotional landscape of the sequel is considerably more muted than the bright-eyed optimism that characterized Judy's initial ascent. Her optimism, once a palpable force that energized entire precincts, has curdled into a quiet determination seasoned by countless late nights poring over inconclusive evidence. There are subtle visual cues to this fatigue. The slight tremor in her paw when she grips her coffee mug too tightly, the way her ears droop momentarily before snapping back to attention when Bogo calls her name. She meticulously documents everything, an overcompensation rooted in the fear that any misstep will be magnified and used to justify her perceived inadequacy by skeptical peers, especially those who resent her rapid rise from Bunnyborough. This internal pressure often makes her stiff and overly formal with Nick, a defense mechanism against blurring the lines of their professional relationship, which she desperately needs to keep unimpeachable during her review period. Nick, conversely, appears outwardly relaxed, yet his casual demeanor masks a deeper cynicism. His success as a consultant is built on knowing precisely how much information to withhold. He wears bespoke suits now, a far cry from his grubby Fox days, but the fabric never seems to sit quite right, suggesting a costume he hasn't fully settled into. His amusement often borders on mockery when dealing with bureaucratic hurdles. He finds the ZPD's adherence to protocol hilarious precisely because he knows how easily it can be circumvented. The tension between him and Judy is frequently catalyzed by his casual disregard for procedure, forcing Judy to choose between maintaining professional integrity and securing the crucial clue Nick possesses. He misses the pure, uncomplicated camaraderie of their first adventure, the thrill of breaking rules for a clear moral victory, recognizing that the current fight is muckier, governed by quarterly reports and shareholder meetings, rather than clear-cut villainy. The film's portrayal of the city itself mirrors this internal complexity. Zootopia is bigger, glossier, but undeniably more stratified. The Shady Oaks Retirement Village, a location introduced late in the plot involving the targeted energy grid, isn't just for aging mammals. It's a microcosm of the city's segregation, subtly designed to house older, less economically vibrant populations, disproportionately smaller herbivores and slower-moving mammals, in zones with notoriously unreliable late-night public transport access. This deliberate infrastructural design reveals the architects of the sabotage are not just interested in profit, but in controlled inconvenience, slowing down the segments of the population they deem less productive or desirable in the modern economic ecosystem. Dawn Bellwether's lingering influence, though she's behind bars, is felt in the cautious paranoia pervading the ZPD's lower ranks. Many officers still operate on instinctual distrust, a psychological scar that Judy constantly has to fight against when trying to foster cooperation between different species units on the new case. Gazelle, the pop icon whose influence was purely cultural in the first film, now emerges as a surprisingly effective, though cautious political advocate, channeling public outrage through tightly controlled, carefully vetted media appearances, a far cry from the spontaneous social justice movements of the past. Her arc reflects the sequel's theme. In a complex system, even revolution requires rigorous PR management. The partnership between Judy and Nick must evolve beyond simple friendship. It demands a strategic convergence of Judy's adherence to systemic legitimacy and Nick's mastery of systemic circumvention, acknowledging that to fix the machine, one sometimes has to learn how to run it illicitly. The emotional evolution of Judy Hopps is perhaps the film's most understated triumph. Her determination has hardened into something resembling armor. The effervescent enthusiasm that once defined her has been traded for a precise, measured energy. When she finally confronts the evidence that systemic bias, rather than simple bad luck or individual error, is stalling her career advancement, the moment is marked not by explosive anger, but by a chillingly quiet resolve. She realizes that to succeed within the ZPD structure, she cannot simply be the best officer. She must become the best political operator, a skill set she actively despises but recognizes as necessary. This internal conflict is often projected onto her interactions with Chief Bogo. She craves his validation, his paternal approval, yet simultaneously resents the subtle ways he tests her capacity for ruthlessness, implicitly warning her that kindness is a luxury in her position. Nick's transformation is characterized by a studied detachment that borders on self-sabotage. While he enjoys the financial freedom his consultancy affords him, allowing him to purchase small concessions or intel that the ZPD budget cannot touch, he occasionally misses the raw stakes of his former life. There are brief, poignant scenes where he watches younger, less sophisticated hustlers on the fringes of Sahara Square, a flicker of his past self, visible in their opportunistic swagger. He uses humor as a shield, deflecting serious conversations about the ethical compromises he makes daily. When he finally admits to Judy that he sometimes misses the simplicity of defrauding individuals rather than dismantling complex corporate structures, it is a moment of profound vulnerability, showing that even the most adaptable survivor yearns for clarity of purpose. His loyalty to Judy is the anchor that prevents his calculated detachment from sliding into full nihilism, yet the strain of protecting her reputation, while engaging in ethically ambiguous information gathering, is evident in the deep lines around his muzzle and close-ups. The environmental storytelling, particularly regarding the infrastructure issues, is amplified through the eyes of secondary characters. We meet a veteran Arctic Fox engineer, a casualty of the initial energy grid sabotage, who speaks in halting, fragmented sentences, his plight dismissed by city officials as a standard workplace injury. His family's inability to afford specialized nocturnal medical care due to convoluted insurance loopholes Nick quickly identifies as deliberately engineered, becomes the emotional core driving their investigation into the financial architects. This grounds the abstract concept of economic sabotage in tangible, species-specific suffering, revealing how slow, bureaucratic violence can be just as devastating as a primal attack. Gazelle's involvement deepens from a symbol of unity to a pragmatic force of change management. Her advisors are intensely focused on framing any public statement to avoid alarming investors or triggering a panicked exodus from the city's progressive narrative. Her inspirational songs now carry undertones of resilience against hidden enemies, rather than simple calls for inclusion. This mirrors the film's ultimate message. Zootopia has matured beyond the simple lesson of coexistence. It now faces the infinitely more complex challenge of maintaining fairness when the threats are invisible, institutional, and dressed in expensive tailored suits. The partnership of Hobbes and Wilde is thus redefined. Judy must learn to weaponize the system's rules against itself, while Nick must occasionally submit to the structure, understanding that sometimes the only way to expose the corruption is to get officially sanctioned clearance to look under the hood. The narrative crescendo pivots on the revelation that the shadowy financial cabal orchestrating the energy sabotage is deeply intertwined with the very zoning commissions that approved the city's segregated infrastructure expansions. This connection exposes a cyclical pattern. Economic exploitation directly funds the creation of biased physical environments, which in turn generates a pool of disenfranchised residents ripe for further manipulation. The film masterfully contrasts the sterile, highly secured corporate headquarters of the main suspect, a sleek, cold structure designed by a renowned otter architect that seems to defy natural light, with the aging, structurally unsound underbelly of the formerly vibrant Little Rodentia district, which has been slowly starved of municipal resources. Judy, utilizing her meticulously maintained police files and Bogo's reluctant authorization for a specialized, cross-jurisdictional audit, begins to connect the dots between building permits and energy allocation spikes. This phase of the investigation forces Nick into an uncomfortable role reversal. He must infiltrate a high society gala hosted by the primary corporate villain, an aging but ruthlessly sharp wolf financier who embodies the very archetype Nick used to scam his way around. Nick has to rely heavily on carefully constructed aliases and practiced social graces, areas where Judy, with her genuine, if sometimes clumsy earnestness, initially proves surprisingly effective as a distraction, or as the necessary straight man in their infiltration efforts. The emotional undercurrent here is Nick's constant fear of being exposed not as a fox, but as a fraud pretending to be accepted by the elite, a far greater personal threat than facing ZPD disciplinary action. He momentarily falters when the wolf attempts to appeal to Nick's shared background of having been an outsider, almost tempting Nick to leverage his unique perspective for significant personal gain, a temptation that only Judy's unwavering, silent presence in the surveillance van keeps him from entertaining too deeply. Chief Bogo, having observed Judy's tactical evolution, makes a calculated risk by temporarily assigning her and Nick a small, specialized task force, composed of officers who have themselves been marginalized or overlooked within the ZPD, a leopard detective renowned for brilliant but unorthodox forensic analysis, and a sloth from the DMV task force, who possesses unexpected, almost superhuman patience for sifting through mountains of digital records. This gesture of trust is Bogo's quiet acknowledgement that the traditional methods of policing are insufficient against this new, highly sophisticated threat. Bogo's own moment of introspection occurs when he reviews old memos concerning the original Zootopia integration plans, realizing that the failures weren't in the initial vision, but in the complacency that allowed the structural fissures to widen years later. His weariness lifts momentarily, replaced by the grim satisfaction of fighting a battle he understands, the defense of civilization against calculated internal rot. The final confrontation isn't a brawl. It's a tense standoff in a server room, where Judy must physically secure the corrupted data, while Nick simultaneously transmits the decrypted evidence to Gazelle's carefully managed media pipeline, a perfect fusion of brute force legality and smooth, operational subterfuge. The successful exposure of the wolf financier and his co-conspirators leaves Zootopia in a state of uneasy reckoning. The fallout is less celebratory and more exhausting, mirroring the sustained effort required to maintain any large-scale idealistic society. Judy Hopps, having navigated the promotion review with a clean slate, her success in uncovering the massive conspiracy overriding any previous bureaucratic complaints, faces the reality of her new seniority. She is no longer the rookie sensation. She is now management, burdened with the responsibility of implementing the very reforms she fought for. This transition proves spiritually taxing. The vibrant energy she once possessed is now channeled into endless policy meetings, trying to rewrite complex zoning regulations that have been intentionally obscured for decades. Her primary emotional struggle becomes patience, not with Nick, whose chaotic competence she now relies upon, but with the glacial pace of institutional change. She finds herself frequently retreating to her apartment, not for rest, but to meticulously reread motivational quotes from her past, seeking the simple, unwavering belief she once held about good triumphing over evil. A belief now complicated by the discovery that sometimes evil simply files the correct paperwork. Nick Wilde experiences a unique form of professional satisfaction mixed with profound alienation. Having successfully infiltrated the highest echelons of the city's elite, a world built on casual cruelty and inherited advantage, he feels both vindicated and deeply uneasy about his own chameleon-like performance. The wolf's final, almost pitying glance at Nick during the arrest lingers. It suggested not defeat, but resignation. As if the wolf knew that even if this iteration of corruption was stopped, another, differently packaged version would inevitably rise from the systemic weaknesses they exposed. Nick's inherent skepticism is validated, yet this validation strips away some of the fun he used to derive from outsmarting the system. He begins to take a genuine, almost parental interest in mentoring some of the younger, more street-smart recruits Bogo assigned to their new task force, realizing that his specialized knowledge is a resource that must be passed on ethically, lest it be weaponized by the next generation of antagonists. His usual sardonic wit becomes softer, often directed inward, as he grapples with how much of his identity is predicated on being an outsider fighting the system, and what happens when he is reluctantly forced to become part of its repair crew. The sequel concludes by illustrating the subtle, lasting impact on the physical city. The immediate aftermath sees visible, tangible changes. Dilapidated infrastructure in Tundra Town receives emergency funding allocations, and the confusing energy tariffs are temporarily suspended. However, the film ends with a long tracking shot moving through the city late at night. We see new construction projects underway, sleek and modern. But observe that the approved blueprints still show residential zones subtly favoring larger, diurnal mammals near prime commercial centers, while nocturnal species are still relegated to areas requiring longer, more complex commutes during their active hours. This final visual confirms the film's thesis. The battle against prejudice is never truly won. It merely shifts battlegrounds. Judy and Nick stand overlooking the skyline, the victory feeling provisional. Their partnership is solidified not by shared adrenaline, but by shared exhaustion and a mutual, unspoken commitment to keep watching the shadows, knowing that the next threat will likely wear a hard hat or carry a shareholder prospectus rather than a weapon. The aftermath of the corporate takedown forces Judy and Nick to confront the true cost of winning within a flawed structure. Judy's promotion officially lands her a deputy chief position, a title that feels heavy with responsibility and bureaucratic entanglement. Her office, while spacious, is filled with the artifacts of administrative battles. Stacks of briefing binders, regulation manuals, and charts detailing interdepartmental cooperation metrics. She spends her mornings mediating disputes between the Public Works Department and the Environmental Commission over water rights for the Oasis Springs sector, realizing that solving one systemic crisis only exposes 5 others waiting underneath. Her emotional state settles into a quiet, focused determination. The country girl's wide-eyed belief has been replaced by the grim knowledge that progress is measured in millimeters, not miles. She occasionally catches her reflection, noting the faint, permanent stress lines around her eyes, the visual proof that navigating the middle tier of power is infinitely more draining than fighting villains on the street. Her deep loyalty to Nick remains her only reliable anchor. He is the one person she can drop all pretense of political correctness with, even if their conversations now revolve around fiscal responsibility audits instead of stakeouts. Nick, surprisingly, thrives in the slightly more ambiguous space he now occupies. He hasn't officially joined the ZPD, maintaining his consultant status, which allows him a necessary level of operational freedom that a badge would inevitably constrain. He has become a master of managed transparency, feeding Judy information that the department can officially act upon, while strategically withholding the ethically dubious origins of that intel. This creates moments of exquisite, shared tension. Judy knows Nick is bending the rules to get her actionable data, and he knows she has to pretend she doesn't know precisely how far he bent them. His greatest evolution is his newfound appreciation for the long game. He sees that his early cons were short-term fixes, while the current effort, however tedious, aims at rewriting the rules of the city itself. He has started quietly funding a legal defense fund for the marginalized mammals affected by the infrastructure collapse, using profits from his most lucrative and entirely legal consulting contracts, a silent act of penance that he staunchly refuses to discuss with Judy, knowing she would either praise him too loudly or insist he report the expenditures. The film introduces a fascinating subplot involving Mayor Lionheart's successor, an unassuming, highly intelligent capybara named Elias Vance. Vance, who campaigned on technocratic efficiency, is initially seen as a savior against the chaos. However, the sequel reveals Vance's flaw: an absolute faith in data models that inherently smooth over messy biological realities. He pushes for automated zoning and resource distribution based on projected efficiency, unknowingly exacerbating the quality of life issues for species with unconventional sleep-touch-wake cycles or slower metabolisms. This contrasts sharply with Bogo's grounded skepticism. Bogo views Vance's reliance on clean algorithms as another form of systemic blindness, echoing the overconfidence that led to the city's previous near collapse. In a memorable scene, Bogo confronts Vance not about corruption, but about the flaw in the spreadsheet, arguing that true governance requires smelling the street, not just reading the sensor data. The emotional resolution for the duo leans into their complementary natures. They aren't seeking a grand, final victory against an arch-villain. They are securing small, incremental victories against inertia. The final sequence shows Judy successfully lobbying for a revision to the nocturnal transit schedule, a victory that affects thousands of ordinary citizens daily, while Nick sits beside her in the council chambers, looking utterly bored yet subtly communicating reassurance. Their partnership has matured into an unspoken symbiosis. Judy provides the institutional leverage and moral center, and Nick provides the necessary shadow knowledge and the willingness to tread where the law has yet to catch up. They are no longer partners discovering Zootopia. They are its weary, dedicated custodians, aware that the peace they maintain is fragile, resting entirely on their shared vigilance. The concept of custodianship introduces a heavier psychological burden on both protagonists, particularly as the narrative shifts focus toward preemptive maintenance rather than reactive policing. Judy, now operating at a near-executive level, finds herself increasingly isolated. The easy rapport she shared with patrol officers has been replaced by formal memos and strategic alliances with other department heads, many of whom view her only as a temporary necessary evil following the recent scandal. Her primary emotional challenge becomes managing the expectations of the public, who still expect the high-octane heroism of the bunny from the first film, while her reality demands painstaking diplomacy with the City Planning Council, a group notoriously resistant to change. There are recurring subtle anxieties surfacing during her high-stakes negotiation sessions. She worries that her genuine empathy, the very trait that made her a good cop, is now perceived as a liability, a soft spot that savvy political operators like Mayor Vance might exploit. Her dedication to self-improvement manifests in late-night studies of municipal law, an obsession that further distances her from her personal life, making Nick's infrequent, spontaneous invitations to grab a late-night donut feel like illicit, vital escapes. Nick's evolution is marked by a deepening commitment to subtle disruption. His role as the shadow consultant allows him to become Zootopia's unofficial, unpaid systems auditor. He delights in finding obscure, forgotten clauses in the city charter that, when correctly invoked, force Vance's efficiency-driven initiatives to stall or redirect funds toward neglected sectors. He often communicates with Judy not through official channels, but through encrypted, coded messages hidden within mundane data transfers, a digital version of the secret handshakes they once used on the streets. His cynicism hardens into a targeted, almost surgical skepticism aimed only at unchecked power. He often visits the newly renovated, high-tech transit hubs that Vance championed, purely to observe the faces of the commuting mammals, who are still struggling with accessibility issues, using these observations to fuel his next consulting maneuver. This quiet activism is his personal redemption, proving that his ability to exploit loopholes can be wielded in service of justice, even if the ZPD brass remains largely unaware of the true extent of his influence. The film further explores the narrative theme of species disparity through the lens of technology adoption. The highly complex, algorithm-driven infrastructure relies heavily on rapid data processing, inherently favoring species with quicker cognitive processing speeds or those naturally acclimated to bright, consistent light sources. The consequences for slower metabolizing or primarily nocturnal species are portrayed through the plight of the aging, often overlooked sloth community within the city's service sector. A key turning point involves a city-wide diagnostic failure that only the extremely patient, detail-oriented sloth employees of the DMV, the very department once ridiculed, could manually trace and isolate, proving that technological reliance breeds new, unseen vulnerabilities. This segment serves as a direct commentary on Zootopia's ongoing hubris. Every solution creates a new form of exclusion that requires a specialized, often marginalized perspective to solve. Bogo, observing this, offers a rare moment of genuine mentorship to Judy, advising her that the true measure of leadership is knowing which obsolete piece of machinery, or which overlooked animal, holds the key to the current crisis. The final act pivots on Judy and Nick using this unique patient insight to dismantle Vance's final, flawed predictive model, recognizing that perfect efficiency is the enemy of resilient diversity. The narrative structure of this installment clearly signals a transition from the external conflict of prejudice to the internal struggle against systemic entropy. Judy's ascent to deputy chief is less a victory celebration and more the acceptance of a lifelong responsibility for maintenance. Her exhaustion is palpable, manifesting in a conscious effort to slow down her speech, a countermeasure against the breathless pace Zootopia demands of its high-ranking officials. She clings to the tangible connection she has with the community, often making unscheduled, unannounced visits to smaller precinct stations outside the gleaming downtown core, seeking the unfiltered ground truth that Vance's data dashboards systematically filter out. These visits are crucial emotional checkpoints. Seeing the genuine effort of beat officers reaffirms her commitment, even as it reminds her how far removed she is from the action that once defined her. Her relationship with Nick is the sole remaining space where she allows for genuine imperfection. When he cracks a particularly dark joke about the bureaucratic nightmare of procurement, she doesn't correct him or file a report. She laughs, a rare, unrestrained sound that serves as both therapy and necessary decompression. Nick, having become Zootopia's expert in ethical gray market intelligence, finds himself in a fascinating position of necessary hypocrisy. He is indispensable to the stability Judy represents, yet his methods remain inherently outside the legal frameworks she now enforces. He begins to view his past as a collection of necessary skills rather than regrettable actions. His wardrobe remains sharp, a deliberate visual barrier between his past and his present utility, but there's a deliberate sloppiness to his office. Papers strewn, takeout containers accumulating, a quiet rebellion against the sterile order demanded by Vance's administration. His defining emotional moment comes when he is forced to testify, under strict immunity and guided by departmental legal counsel, about his knowledge regarding the infrastructure sabotage. Facing the official inquest, he drops his usual sarcastic veneer and delivers a clear, concise explanation of how sophisticated corruption operates beneath the surface of legitimate finance. It is the first time he has fully aligned his street smarts with the legal apparatus, and the effort drains him. The moment the testimony concludes, he retreats entirely for 3 days, communicating only with Judy via cryptic, untraceable text messages, signaling the sheer mental toll of operating within the white lines. The foil provided by Mayor Vance, the capybara technocrat, proves instrumental in forcing Judy and Nick to synthesize their unique skills. Vance represents the seductive promise of perfect, unbiased governance through pure mathematics. However, the sloth subplot, where the DMV's meticulous, slow processing is revealed to be the only mechanism capable of spotting the infinitesimally slow, algorithmically hidden data tampering, serves as a direct rebuke to Vance's speed-obsessed ideology. This forces Bogo to articulate a crucial maxim to Judy. Speed is worthless without accuracy, Hops, and accuracy sometimes demands we move at the pace of the slowest among us. This lesson resonates deeply with Judy, reinforcing her appreciation for Nick's often frustrating deliberateness and the methodical nature of the overlooked DMV employees. The resolution is not about dismantling Vance, but about integrating his efficient systems with the necessary human, or rather mammalian, oversight, recognizing that resilience requires redundancy and diverse processing speeds. The final shot of the film positions Judy and Nick not in front of the City Hall, but at the newly integrated slow-speed accessibility ramp leading into a newly funded nocturnal community center, a symbol that the future of Zootopia depends on accommodating the slowest commute just as much as the fastest flight path. The shift toward infrastructure and institutional oversight forces a subtle but significant change in the visual language of the sequel. Where the first film was characterized by vibrant, genre-specific districts, the icy grandeur of Tundra Town, contrasting with the frantic energy of the Rainforest District, the 2025 installment highlights the intersections and the failures of connection. Long, lingering shots are dedicated to aging, poorly lit tunnels that service the outskirts, juxtaposed with the brilliantly lit, heavily monitored corporate plazas. This visual dichotomy reinforces the central theme. Zootopia is a city succeeding brilliantly at the macro level of image projection, while failing fundamentally at the micro level of equitable access. Judy, acutely aware of these visual discrepancies, channels her frustration into policy advocacy for equitable lighting and commute standards, a campaign that sounds painfully dull but is, in fact, the new front line in the war against systemic bias. Her emotional landscape becomes defined by the struggle against bureaucratic inertia. In one pivotal scene, she tries to push through an emergency repair budget for a failing water pump in a low-income rodent neighborhood. The debate is hijacked by Vance's administration, which insists on running a 6-month-long efficiency study before allocating any funds. Judy explodes, not in anger, but in cold intellectual fury, meticulously citing past precedents where similar studies deliberately delayed necessary action for profit motives. This calculated, evidence-based response shocks her peers, showcasing that her early, instinctual passion has been forged into a formidable, legally precise weapon. She realizes that to truly enact change, she must speak the language of finance and regulation, using the system's own dense lexicon as her shield and sword. Nick remains the master of the unconventional approach, often acting as Judy's necessary rogue element. He takes particular pleasure in exposing the ridiculousness of Mayor Vance's faith in raw data. Nick uses his consulting access to feed misleading, statistically sound data into Vance's models concerning trivial matters, like projecting massive population growth in abandoned warehouse districts, forcing the administration to waste crucial time and political capital validating absurd projections. This serves as necessary operational friction, buying Judy time to maneuver through the official channels. His true affection for Judy is demonstrated not through grand gestures but through subtle acts of operational support. He preemptively runs background checks on every committee member Judy is about to negotiate with, providing her with dossiers detailing their past voting records and personal financial quirks, ensuring she is never negotiating in the dark. Chief Bogo observes this symbiotic relationship with a nuanced understanding. He recognizes that the pure, linear career path he once followed is obsolete. He permits Judy and Nick's unorthodox synergy because he understands that the new threats, invisible, corporate, and regulatory, cannot be defeated by standard police work alone. Bogo's quiet pride manifests in his steadfast defense of their unorthodox methods during his own highly scrutinized oversight meetings. He counters accusations of procedural violation by calmly stating that the spirit of the law, the maintenance of a functional, integrated society, outweighs slavish adherence to outdated protocols. This subtle shift in his leadership style suggests that even the most rigid figures in Zootopia must adapt their definition of order when the threat moves from overt crime to systemic decay. The ultimate message solidifies. Repairing Zootopia requires both the meticulous builder and the skilled saboteur working in concert. The ongoing effort to maintain Zootopia's delicate equilibrium exacts a toll that manifests subtly in the protagonist's physical interactions. Judy and Nick, though professionally intertwined, exhibit a guardedness that speaks to the high stakes of their current roles. Their shared meals are less about camaraderie and more about necessary tactical debriefings. The small table in the precinct break room, a silent sanctuary where they can drop the facade of their public personas. Judy, striving for professional perfection in her new role, frequently finds herself editing her own dialogue, preemptively softening potential legal ambiguities before Nick even has a chance to exploit them, a habit he finds both irritating and deeply reassuring. She is terrified of being the reason Nick gets pulled back into the world of legitimate jeopardy. Nick, meanwhile, has developed a pronounced aversion to any situation that requires genuine, prolonged vulnerability. His sharp suits and tailored demeanor are a costume designed to project success and control. Yet there are fleeting moments, usually late at night when reviewing the complex financial webs they untangle, where his mask slips. He gazes at the holographic projections of Zootopia's failing infrastructure, with a look that mirrors the quiet despair of his early life. A recognition that the city's mechanisms, once built on simple prejudice, are now so complex they actively consume the innocent through sheer mathematical error. His commitment to the slow justice Judy advocates is tested daily by the temptation to revert to quick, decisive, and illegal fixes. His primary inspiration now comes from an unlikely source: the rigorous, almost monastic dedication of the DMV sloth employees, whose sheer persistence in the face of automation has become a personal touchstone for him. A reminder that tedious diligence can sometimes outmaneuver flashy corruption. Mayor Vance's administration pushes forward with Phase 2 of the Smart City Initiative, which relies heavily on bioscanners for access to high-value zones, ostensibly for security, but practically for data aggregation. This introduces a new layer of implicit species profiling. The scanners, calibrated for average mammalian thermal signatures and movement speeds, frequently misidentify smaller nocturnal species or those with slower metabolic rates, essentially locking them out of essential services during peak hours. This forces Judy and Bogo into a rare, united front against Vance. Bogo, utilizing his deep institutional memory, recalls historical data showing similar exclusionary technologies being trialed in segregated zones decades prior. His intervention is a masterclass in bureaucratic resistance. He doesn't argue philosophy, but rather cites obsolete zoning codes and safety violations from the 1950s to force an immediate injunction against the scanner deployment, demonstrating that sometimes the best way to fight the future is with the dusty weight of the past. The climax of this phase is not an arrest, but a meticulously planned public demonstration of the system's failure, orchestrated by Nick and executed by a coalition of marginalized community leaders, including a surprisingly eloquent gazelle, who uses her platform to live-stream the malfunctioning scanners impacting her own nocturnal sound engineers. Judy, standing legally beside the livestream feed, offers the official ZPD statement, acknowledging the systemic flaw without casting blame on Vance directly, maintaining the tenuous peace. This collaborative victory solidifies their dynamic. Nick provides the perfectly engineered disruption from the outside, and Judy provides the legitimate framework necessary to absorb that disruption without shattering the city's governing structure. The final image is of Judy and Nick reviewing the revised access protocols, a document far longer and more complicated than the original. Their expressions not of triumph, but of weary acknowledgement that the work of true integration is endless, requiring constant, exhausting iteration. The enduring nature of Zootopia's challenges has instilled in Judy a profound sense of measured caution, replacing the bold certainty of her early career. Her deputy chief role demands constant performance review analysis, and she finds herself scrutinizing not just the infractions of others, but the often unspoken resentment simmering beneath the surface of her own staff. She notices how certain veteran officers, those who navigated the tumultuous period preceding the current integration efforts, watch her with a blend of respect and suspicion, wondering if her success is built on genuine merit, or simply the current political climate favoring a high-profile herbivore. This pressure causes her to retreat into an almost puritanical adherence to procedure when dealing with Vance's administration, trying to render herself utterly untouchable by accusations of favoritism toward Nick's shadowy activities. Her moments of deepest self-doubt occur when she realizes that to climb higher, she must occasionally greenlight Nick's ethically questionable intelligence gathering, effectively becoming complicit in the very slipperiness she once sought to eradicate from policing. Nick, increasingly comfortable within the rarefied circles of Zootopia's financial elite due to his consultancy work, now battles a subtler form of temptation: the allure of simply profiting from the status quo. He has access to investment opportunities, insider information that could secure his future indefinitely, far beyond the sporadic commissions from the ZPD. This internal conflict is manifested in his increasing difficulty in generating genuine sarcasm. His jokes now often land with a hollow echo, reflecting a man who has seen too much of the machine to find it truly funny anymore. His loyalty to Judy is the only variable he cannot factor into his risk assessments. When a high-ranking board member attempts to leverage a past, minor regulatory breach of Nick's against Judy's promotion track, Nick reacts with a cold, controlled ferocity unseen since his early hustling days, not to protect himself, but to shield her career. He dismantles the board member's leverage not with a thrilling chase, but with a perfectly timed, anonymized leak detailing the board member's own questionable offshore holdings, proving that his expertise in exploiting blind spots is now employed with surgical precision for moral objectives. Chief Bogo's role evolves into that of the institutional gatekeeper, the one who understands that true power in Zootopia no longer resides in the precinct floor, but in the archives and the legislative chambers. He becomes Judy's silent protector against Vance's managerial overreach, using his extensive understanding of historical precedents to thwart Vance's attempts to circumvent due process regarding the scanner issue. Bogo's inspiration stems from a deep-seated belief that societal order is fragile, best maintained by those who respect its complex, often contradictory foundational rules. He sees in Judy the potential for leadership that he himself lacked, the ability to adapt the rules without entirely discarding them. His mentorship is sparse but potent. He seldom offers praise, but when he does, it is devastatingly effective, such as when he notes, after the scanner injunction, that Judy finally learned how to wield bureaucracy as a weapon, rather than merely submitting to it. The film's thematic